today's show, we are going to provide you with the 10 principles that will help to minimize the devastation of divorce, the impact that it has on most children whose parents divorce. Margaret Miller and Kip Miller have been divorced actually for 16 years, and they have 2 sons. However, they are now writing a book about the success that they've had at co-parenting their children. Welcome to the show today. Thank you for being here.
Thanks.
Okay. And so, how would you describe the divorce process that you went through? Was it because you're able to sit here and write this book and talk about it, was it easy in the beginning?
Well, anybody who's ever bought a house, it's about 10 times harder than that because it's so emotional, and there's so many legal steps that you do have to take. And then there's the emotional piece of going before a judge in a courtroom and undoing what you had done in a church with all good intentions. So I think people who haven't been through it can't imagine how wrenching it is. Emotionally, psychologically, and even just practically to know what to do because you've never done it before, and it's very important to do it right.
Would you characterize your divorce as one that was deeply emotional and deeply hurtful and impactful on your life? Was it really, really difficult for you?
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh.
That's why we separated twice, not wanting to have to take that step.
Yeah, we tried for a long, long time to keep things together.
So you went to counseling, you
Yes.
separated and then reconciled and all of that?
Yes, several times. And I think you would almost hope that divorce would be, you would think that divorce would be a terrible situation for most people, and it really was for us. Yes.
I just want people to understand that even though you're able to reflect back and talk about some success that you've had in co-parenting your children, it wasn't a cakewalk in the beginning. It was a devastation, and just as it is for many other people, right? I mean, we can say that with all honesty.
Yes, I don't think we ever thought we'd be sitting here talking to you. Back
It was an embarrassment in the church for me and in my Bible study. And socially, I think many people still feel divorce is a stigma, even though 50% of couples or so get divorced. It's just not something, especially if you're a Christian, you ever want to experience. But we failed. We just failed to be able to make our marriage work. And a lot of people fail at other things and are able to keep the marriage on track. Our failure was in keeping that marriage together. But we didn't fail at the parenting part.
Right.
We've done really well at that.
And that's marvelous,
Great.
yeah.
Great.
And so you're both strong Christians then.
That's right.
You know, it's not like you didn't have a faith that
Right.
you brought into the relationship. So let's watch this clip on YouTube, which will remind us of the child's perspective when it comes to divorce. Okay, what were some of your biggest concerns when you went through the divorce process?
I'd have to say emotional damage to the children. disruption of their lives. What's
So they
going on
were the
inside their heads.
primary focus.
Everything,
Yeah.
yes. I really didn't care about much else. It was devastating, as you said. But the kids, it's funny how you do anything to save your children. And in our case, we wanted to save them from the pain and the disruption that we had really caused.
And I don't think it's possible to save children from the pain of losing their married parents. Even in bad marriages, children still have that security that both parents are still right there. I will also say that I was afraid of not having a life partner. It was not only convenient to have somebody to be my helpmate, but it was consoling sometimes to not be alone. I had lost both my parents and a sister early in life, and I did not want to lose this life partner. So
It was
very emotional, but yeah,
a lot of grief for you.
it was different for me.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So you have developed what we call the 10 Commandments of Post-Divorce Parenting. You want to talk about those? I know you've written several articles on them, and they're going to be in your book. The first commandment. Oh, first of all, how did you develop those?
Okay. Well, I wrote an article I think it was for Parents Press in California back in the late 90s. And we were parenting, but it was still in those early, really difficult days. And I saw all these men around me that I was working with, or just moving. Their kids and their wives would move. They'd stay behind. Everything seemed fine. I'm going, what's wrong with this picture? Our father's saying, I don't have time for the kids, but I'll catch up with them next week. So I wrote an article I actually had 13 commandments of the things you should do to get along with your ex for the sake of the children, and meaning for the sake of the children, making the children's lives better. And so out of that, I guess I got a lot of my frustration and maybe anger out by
So
writing
it was
that.
almost therapeutic for you.
It was therapy for me. I was so surprised when they called me up and said, we want this article and we're going to make it our main article. And I'm thinking,
And this was in Parenting Magazine?
I think yes, Parenting Magazine out of California.
Okay. And so the first commandment is to take care of yourself. You want to talk about that and the importance of doing that? How do you do that?
Well, Kip and I had gone to marriage counseling, and after that ended, I continued to go to some counseling to make sure that I wasn't going to try to get my emotional needs met by my children. I still had things to work through, feelings that I wanted to talk about, and sometimes friends are not the best venue for that, and I found that counseling really did help. So taking care of myself emotionally, I began running. I ran a marathon for the first time in my
So
life.
set some goals that
Yeah.
got your mind off of
That's
the
right.
thing.
Made me feel successful in other ways. I felt like I had not been successful at this, and it was helpful to set some other goals that I felt I could reach.
And I think something you said is very important, and a lot of parents fall into the trap of relying on their children to meet their emotional
yes.
needs, would you say?
Oh, yes.
And that is, why is that a bad idea? And they're probably a lot of them are willing to try to do it.
Well, you hear the mothers say, "You're now the man of the house," to their 10-year-old.
Exactly.
And no way should a 10-year-old ever have that kind of responsibility. Even though they might feel it, we shouldn't verbalize it that way. I remember finding a kitten and thinking to the children, do you think Dad might like to have a pet? Because Dad was lonely over there, and I didn't want him to not have anybody but the children. And so he took care of this cat, and it became a way of taking care of himself, to have something to be nurturing with.
And I was deathly allergic to cats, so I wasn't quite sure what
I
this
wasn't trying to
meant.
punish him, though.
And I have to tell you, the miracles, small miracles happen every day. I've never sneezed since. I've had the cat 16 and a half years.
A miracle, absolutely, huh?
And the boys, that cat coming over to visit the cat was a whole huge, wonderful addition to the family, because that was a new link.
And Kip, what did you do to take care of yourself during this time?
I tried to eat because I wasn't much interested in eating. I wanted to,
You did the Bible study, remember?
Exactly, I did. And I became
A lot of times people, I'm going to say from a pastoral perspective, people disappear. They drop out of the Bible studies and that kind of thing. So that, what you're saying
I
is
had some
very
good
important.
older people who were my mentors at church. It's not that they came out of the woodwork, but they really stepped forward and said, why don't you come over and bring the kids to our house on Sunday night? And they're quite an interesting bunch. And that was a great transition for me, because it was very welcoming, and they were very kind to Margaret. She wasn't there, but of course, but they were they followed on some of our own principles. It was very supporting for the boys and for Margaret, and that and a bit of therapy. I mean, not everyone can afford therapy, let's face it. It's a luxury. But there are people in your church, there are people in your own life that you trust who are even-keeled. You have to look for those people. They're not going to go after the other spouse. When you find those people, you know you've found someone you can talk to.
And that's another important thing is who do you expose yourself to? If you have a friend that is bad-mouthing your spouse or reinforcing some dysfunctional tendencies, it's probably not a good idea to hang out with them.
That's right.
A lot, right?
No, it's poisonous.
Yeah.
It's a difficult choice to make sometimes. You have to shed those friends. But your children are more important than your friends, last I checked.
I don't think we had any friends who chose between us. They were friends with both of us before we divorced, and we maintained those friendships separately after the divorce.
Yeah.
And that could be very painful if people were choosing between.
Yeah.
Yeah. That the second commandment is make as much peace as you can as quickly as you can. What do you mean by that?
Well, in the early days, when emotions are running high, if you can somehow suppress those or try to limit the damage, think before you pick up the phone and say the wrong thing. Think before you go to the wrong place. Think before you say something to your kids. But mostly, try to be civil to the other person. Just be civil. Even if, as Margaret said, in some divorces there are truly people who have gone way over the line. Just try to be civil. Don't be rude. And if you can do that, that's a first small step. For the children, once again, they see that. And for you, there's benefits too, of course. That's what I would say.
I was just going to bring up an issue with my former mother-in-law, who we didn't get along for a while during the marriage, and then after we split up, I started thinking, you know, I'd like to make peace with her. And the children wanted that too. And so it was a choice that I made to try to mend that relationship, partly for the children, because I knew that she was important to them. And again, it's just about the choices. And so making peace goes sometimes beyond just the one relationship. It was an extended family, and Kip made peace with my brothers and sisters, and it required a lot of burying of hatchets sometimes and just forgiving each other, and it all worked for good.
I know sometimes we refer to that concept as giving up our rights, in terms of my right to maintain this grudge, or my right to hold on to the anger that I feel, or to be treated in a certain way, that we just give that up, we forgive, and focus on the relationships. I don't know.
I would do anything for my children when they were small, when they are grown. And if you can somehow realize that when you're first going through the divorce and keep putting them in the center of the table, I'm saying you are the focus, then a lot of things will automatically fall into place. You don't want to hurt the ones you love, especially your children.
You think of the things that money can buy that parents are willing to give their children, and peace is something money can't buy. But we want to give our children peace, and it takes something really deep inside in order to do that. But that's the greatest gift.
The third commandment is choose your battles and settle privately. I'm going to talk about that
What
one.
battles did we choose?
Well, I would say, briefly, it's just choosing your battles, meaning if you're going to argue out of sight of the children. I mean, married couples have arguments.
So don't argue in front of the children.
No, that's rule number one.
Right.
Just somehow
Same thing, yeah.
suppress it.
Right.
And then take it private. And then, but really also think about, is it worth it?
Is it worth it?
Because that gives you an extra little moment to almost count to 10 to go, really, should I go there?
Yeah.
Because you
Well,
just,
that's a rule that even married couples can
Right.
take and,
Sure.
and run
That's
with.
right.
It's not worth fighting about everything.
For example, not getting so upset about the kids always coming home with a suitcase full of dirty clothes when you always send them back with a suitcase full of clean clothes. Something like that,
That's-
perhaps?
That's a good one.
yeah, that's excellent. Yeah.
So should they fight about it or not?
No, that's not worth
Yeah,
fighting.
not worth it. Choose your battle. The fourth one is talk with the children every day.
Wow, that was a hard one at first. This was back in the time of fax machines, 1995, and we didn't have other ways to communicate. So when the boys were with me, sometimes the children would fax the report card or the homework, or Kip would call them and talk to them, and I tried not to get in the way because I didn't really want to talk on the phone with him every day. But he wanted to talk to them every day, and they would call him. And I encouraged that. I just wanted to stay out of it.
If your children want to talk to you, that I think they should be allowed to. And the parent who holds that back is really depriving them of a very basic need.
So what if they're calling to complain about the other parent?
Well, it's a good opportunity for you to say, I hear you. That's very interesting, but your mother or your father is doing their best. I'll talk to your mother or father about that later. And what else is going on today? Takes
So
practice.
not taking up sides again,
Takes practice.
honoring that other parent,
That's right.
not
Well,
undermining them.
exactly.
Yeah.
One thing Kip did, Blake was very young, and so Kip told some stories into a tape recorder. And Blake would play them in his bed because Kip wasn't there to read to him. And I remember hearing Kip's voice tell the story about the squirrel and closing the door. It was sweet for Blake, but it was almost like Kip was back in the house. And
Yeah.
so I had to live with that, but it was worth it because Blake got to hear his dad's voice.
Now that's an interesting idea that you could do something like that, have a recording or.
I had always
something,
read to
yeah.
him
Right.
before the divorce, before I went to bed, and I just thought that that would be a good tradition to keep going.
And he responded well to that.
Oh yeah, very comforting.
The fifth commandment is live within a reasonable distance.
Mostly falls to the father, even today, because that's the spouse who's moving out. You lived with your children before, why would you want to move far away? I mean, distance really fosters problems. There are reasons that it happens. I'm not condemning people who do it. But if you can, even if it's of some sacrifice to you, live as near as you can. Kids feel when the parent, even if they're sleeping in another house, is nearby, it's a tremendous comfort.
Right.
They can't go over in the middle of the night, but they know you're there. And heaven forbid, should something happen, you can get to the other person's house in a big hurry.
I think a lot of times what happens when people are divorced is somehow they don't realize the importance of the proximity issue. That somehow there's a barrier up where they're not as committed to being with that child as they used to be. And I think it's especially a danger for men.
And Holly, of course, meant these people, us, we all want to get away from each other. At least we need some space.
Right.
I almost thought of moving to Maryland where my sister was. And she had children my children's age, and I thought, I'm out of here. And he said, oh, no, you're not. We had a divorce decree that made us both agree that we would not move anywhere without the other one's consent. Which
So that was actually in the divorce decree.
Yes, one of our lawyers who is a mother of 4 children. And who tried to keep us together. Ironically, I'd go to her and she'd go, look, we're not going to go do divorce if we can help it. She worked really hard, but she said, we're going to do this because nobody's moving.
And that was the right thing.
And so it was the lawyer's idea to put that stipulation in the divorce decree.
Yes.
And would you would recommend that if at all
Definitely.
possible?
Very
Definitely.
much so.
Because, right, it's
and
for the
it-
children.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Kip's family was in New Hampshire, and back then they were still in New Hampshire, and Kip very much wanted to be back with them. But because the children were in Texas, he said not until they went away to college would he go back to New Hampshire. And sure enough, the minute that they were both in college, he moved back to New Hampshire.
So both of you made significant sacrifices in terms of your career, in terms of your comfort, to maintain the family unit, even if it was in 2 households.
And so the boys
That's
could
right.
be in the same school where they were used to being, and their friends were still there, and their baseball teams were still there, and we were still there. Yeah.
Another one, number 6, is be there for them even if it isn't your turn.
That's a tough one. But if you were married and the other person had to go do something, you would be parenting. So keeping track I found is one of the most poisonous aspects of a divorce, of whose turn is it, and I took care of them then, I'm not going to take care of them now. You're forgetting. It's your children you're talking about. They need somebody to take care of them, and look upon it as an opportunity. I get to spend more time with their children. And a lot of people are going to say, you're crazy, I've had enough of spending time with them. And I go, well, what's wrong with that response? It's extra time, and the children see you're willing to work. Even if the other parent is just, irresponsibly, which I'm very fortunate was not the case, saying, I don't feel well, or can you take the kids? Take the kids if it's at all physically possible.
Things happen in life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes with work or family emergencies and somebody has to disappear, and of course you're going to be available to take care of your own children if the other parent can't. Of course you are.
And it would be the same in a marriage if for example, one parent had become ill,
Yes.
or chronically ill or seriously ill or had a situation, the other parent would step in. And that, what you're saying is that cannot change.
No questions asked, the parent would step in.
And not make the children feel guilty or unwanted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I agree.
The seventh one is don't let money get in the way. Now this has got to be a big one.
Even in happy marriages, money often gets in the way.
Right.
So in a divorce, and we didn't have a lot of money, but what we did have, we wanted to feel was being spent wisely. And again, there are things that come up that you can't anticipate when you're getting divorced. Who's going to pay for all these extra, the tutoring, the braces, it's not just food and room and board.
That
lot
go
of
beyond
things.
child support.
That's
The school
exactly
trip
right.
that you didn't expect. And, money can be very valuable at times.
And should
and
you have to
short.
provide an accounting for where every penny is going? We had to negotiate all these things. And sometimes we just had to let go of it and say, I trust you.
Right, right. We let go of some, especially the small things. We started not telling each other about the small things. At first we did. I mean, money was tight. And you also, there's that a bit of resentment. Why am I paying more? And you always have to keep, because they're my children. But still, you're paying money that you're not going to have. And it gets complicated. Money's a terrible thing in a lot of ways. And boy, does it show up as that in a divorce. But we were able to just move on in the little things, and pretty soon we just say, oh, by the way, I had to do this. Oh, okay, because you trust the other person.
And it was so important because now that our children, one's out of college and one's in college, the expenses are enormous. And so we're not talking about little bits of money. We're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars with tuition and cars and insurance and health care and all of those big bills. And so we learned how to talk about money on a smaller scale when it was just when the children were smaller.
Right.
And now that we had to put them through school, it was a little bit easier to budget and talk about sharing these expenses in the later years.
Okay. Number 8 is respect each other's opinion.
In front of children, because that's really where that commandment comes in, it's important to give the other person their due. It goes back to, I guess, respect your mother and your father. Your opinion is valuable. I may not agree with you, but I'm not going to start being negative towards you, because children pick up on that. They go, well, why are you being so negative towards Mom because she says this?
I'll give an example.
Yeah.
We had a very good public school for middle school, and our older son Evan attended 1 year. And I decided that was not the best school for him, and I recommended that we put him in a private school, an international school. And Kip wasn't convinced that was the right thing. And so I offered to pay 1 year of the private school myself because I felt that strongly about it. And once Kip said, okay, yes, I agree, then we were able to partner together. And I respected his opinion, but not enough to buckle under. And I was able to scrape together the tuition to send Evan. And
Right.
so we were able to talk about it. And even in good marriages, again, people don't always agree.
That's
and
right.
so after a divorce, it's especially important to hear each other out and compromise sometimes.
Agreed.
The 9th commandment is talk with your ex-spouse about the kids. That seems obvious. What do you mean by that?
If you're living together as man and wife, you're going to talk about them, or you would hope, all the time, in passing through the kitchen to the dining room at all hours of the day, or when you're calling to say you're going to be late or pick this up at the store. It just happens naturally. So you almost have to force yourself. You do have to force yourself sometimes to call that person and say, listen, this is what I just wanted to tell you how his day was. It wasn't very exciting, but this is how his day went. Oh, can you put him on? Can you do this? Can you tell me that? That it's communication, and the
Or
kids
in the
see-
teenage years when they
it
don't
gets
share
particularly
very
important.
much.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really important as our children became adolescents and went in their rooms and closed the door and lost their temper quite a bit. It's hard on a mom. And so I wanted to talk with Kip. Is he doing that over there? And it was almost as though the kids were in two different worlds, and we needed to share information so that we could make sure we weren't missing out on some important things that might be happening.
And there would have to be a lot of trust from your standpoint, because if there weren't, you wouldn't want to be vulnerable perhaps about some problems that you might be having with that
Right.
child. and fearing that they
Yeah,
would
we-
use that against you. I mean, was that ever a thought that you had?
We had to bring that up sometimes. So and so doesn't like me and thinks I'm a monster for doing this or having
Yeah.
this restriction, or that I'm being unreasonable. And we each had to be honest with each other, saying, I support you, or do you think you may have overreacted a little bit like this? Just like we would have if we'd all been under the same roof. It's hard, but once you start doing it and it succeeds, it just gets easier and easier.
What are some of the things that you need to have consistent guidelines on that we might not think about it as a married couple, but the children are in two different places? Is it important that they have the same curfew at your house as they do your house? And what kinds of issues like that come up that people need to talk about and navigate in advance as much as possible?
A great question, because we in the early days spent a lot of time talking about allowances and then curfew and
Driving.
friends driving. And we pretty much kept the same hours, the same amounts, the same chore schedule, so that when they went to each house, their lives didn't turn upside down. It's either, recreation time or it's slave time.
Right.
It was all responsible time. And we would call each other in check. And sometimes, children being children, they'd play you off and say against each other and call up and say, well, do I really need to be home at 11:30? Mom lets me be home at midnight. And Margaret would say, I never let him come home at midnight, and he knows it. So yes,
But
setting rules makes it easier.
By the same token, we each had our own different style of parenting. And Kip was much more of a routine kind of dad. Every Saturday they went to get fried chicken at the fried chicken place, and that's something that they loved to do. Well, every Saturday I did something different with them. And so they didn't require that I be like Dad. They understood that we were different. But when it came to things that mattered, like the allowance and the chores and those
Right.
kinds of things, yeah, we did discuss it and tried to keep them the same.
Exactly.
What if you have a situation where you have the Disneyland dad? You actually use that term, Kip, where, how do you deal with that? Or one parent who just doesn't hold the line and doesn't see the need to hold the line. How should the other parent react to that?
I think they should, difficult as it may be, speak up. A lot of fathers feel, because they have the children for such a short time, or that they don't know what to do with the children when they have them, they're going to entertain them. And I used to see them at nights other than nights that I was out with the children. You could always tell the divorced fathers with the kids, because they take them out to dinner because they didn't want to cook for them. And it's all this noise, there's no attention being paid. Weekends, distract them. Take them someplace where we can all do something. I don't have to parent. Stay home with the kids. Cook a meal together. Cook a meal, cook a hamburger. Make every night you've got them spaghetti night. Doesn't matter. Talk while you're cooking. Children see that. They get used to that. They have real conversation with you, as boring as it may be. It's real life. And they'll learn something. And you learn something about them.
And the last commandment that you have is to find a mediator or lawyer who is putting the children first. And again, very briefly, what would you say about that?
She came up with some ideas that we never would have thought of, and I remember one of them about what if one of them wanted to join the armed forces, or what if one of them wanted to go away to boarding school and the other parent, didn't agree that the child should go away. It was really important at that initial phase that we understood these are the ground rules, and unless something really terrible comes up, we're going to live by them.
Most parents are devastated when they're going through a divorce, at least one of them, usually two. They're not thinking about the next day. The divorce decree is really second place. And this woman who had my lawyer who had the family pointed out to me, make sure you can live close to them. If your wife or husband wants to move, get permission. Firm costs fixed ahead of time. What do the kids really need? What does the other partner need to need if he or she has them the majority of the time? Visitation, what's reasonable for everybody? What's a good schedule for the kids? How are you going to handle holidays? We even had that put in for long distance. How do you break up a holiday? And after she started talking, because she was a sane, level-headed person, not in the divorce, she came up with this whole list of very sensible rules that I have found, and Margaret has found, so many parents do not follow, to their misfortune and to the kids' misfortune.
And the agreement's not fixed in stone. You can always go back and
That's
decide
right.
we want to do it differently, but to start out with some kind of a guideline
Exactly.
is really meaningful
So
and helpful.
make sure that you find a mediator who is putting the children and the family unity first.
Right.
Right, mediator or a lawyer, depending on how you're doing it, but somebody who's going to put it down on an official document that everyone's going to have to sign off on.
Thank you very much. Time is almost too short to cover this topic, but we appreciate your insights, and thank you for being with us. So as you have been watching tonight, maybe someone has come to mind who might need to hear this information, the 10 commandments of post-divorce parenting. You can send them the link to this show by going to our website and clicking on our YouTube link. So please also tell us how you found this program helpful. Thank you very much for watching.